Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Alberto Rosende, your host and CEO of M2i Global, a critical minerals supply chain company, and this is the Minerals Metals Initiative, a podcast exploring the transformation of the critical minerals supply chain as we race for global resilience, from mineral extraction and refinement to policy and innovation. Join us each episode as we examine a different aspect of the urgent push to modernize, diversify, and de-risk the world's critical minerals supply chain. Joining us today for our very first episode is Peter O'Rourke. After serving honorably in the United States Navy and Air Force, Peter has been active in the healthcare, aerospace, and critical minerals industry. He currently serves as a senior advisor to M2i Global. Peter, thanks for being here today.
Thanks, Al. It's great to be with you and excited about this new podcast. It's obviously timely, obviously needed, and I think it's going to really magnify and amplify the conversations need to be had around this critical area.
Peter, before we get started, why don't you give us a brief summary of your background and everything that you've been doing since you left the service?
I've had an interesting route getting to critical minerals. As you said, I served both in the United States Navy and the United States Air Force. But in the Air Force, I had the chance to work at the Air Force Material Command, and there, supporting all of our weapon systems that the Air Force supports. We were starting to look at and starting to see some of the fissures of the global supply chain around these critical minerals and just our access to it. And there were some folks early on that were, really starting to, come out and say, look, we need to start paying attention to this. But, as you and I both know, this is now an issue that has been building, but now has really cracked open as a significant issue for the United States to address, our allies, NATO, and really the globe as we look at the critical shortages that not only we face, but the rest of our partners. So also had experience directly with a company bringing magnesium processing back to the U.S. And I'm sure we'll talk about that more, later in our podcast. But it really, really struck me, on the ground, seeing what some of these challenges really are and, what we're going to have to do to overcome them, both from a supply side and a demand side for these critical minerals. And, we've seen some great examples of that here recently, too, of some solutions to those challenges. So great to be here.
No, thanks a lot, Peter, and I appreciate everything that you've talked about so far. You still left a lot of stuff off the table that you've been involved in that gives you a really broad view of critical minerals and how they impact us now. Critical minerals has been on the front page for a long, long time now. Particularly in the last administration, starting back to really the first Trump administration, it really made the front page. But I know it goes beyond that, as you mentioned. It goes back to even Obama. And it really came to forefront as well, not only because of China's overdominance in this area, but also because of the depletion of several of our arsenals, if you will, in supporting Ukraine and some of the other things that we've been doing. So when we go and look at today's paper, we know that the DoD and MP Materials have shaken hand on a great deal. And maybe you can bring that to the forefront at this point and talk about what the deal is, and then really what the infrastructure behind the deal, what allowed that deal to take place. I'm going to give you the mic a little bit to kind of put a framework around the MP Material DoD deal.
Yeah, no, I think everybody in this industry is really excited about this because it really does exemplify, really the result that we're all looking for when it comes to government action, both from the executive and, a little bit of the legislative side as well, with some appropriations and authorizing language that they've been able to put in place. But really, I kind of put this in the perspective of patient aggression. You have to be patient in this space because, as we know, whether you're a junior miner or, developing a new processing technology, those things take time. There's a lot of long lead time items, whether it's just development of the tech, whether it's digging holes in the ground, finding assets across friendly geographies, and then also dealing with all the politics involved with that. This really is where it all kind of comes together. They're meeting a very specific need when it comes to rare earth magnets, and that's what this deal is all about. And it's been one of the very critical items that we've been talking about, along with other components for technology. It goes into airplanes, tanks, and pretty much any kind of technology we use from a defense perspective, from linking GPS, bombs, bullets. It covers pretty much everything I think folks have really started to understand where all these items go into. I can tell you from an executive perspective, from an administration side, what the Trump administration's been doing is, really working out what's the best opportunity for them to make a statement about their commitment to critical minerals, the development of the processing side, but also leading the way for others to think creatively, really to approach the government on ideas that they have and projects that they want to work on, to really double back and really make sure that they've got a solid proposal, because you get one shot at the U.S. federal government on these kind of things. So I think it's really helped everybody understand and clarify what you need to do to put together really a multi-billion-dollar deal, and it really happened the way I think we would expect. You work with the government, they make a commitment to you, whether this is through Defense Production Act Title 3, which is what part of this deal was, the loan guarantees they're going to get as part of this, and then being able to turn right around. And I'm sure simultaneously they were working in parallel with the Apple deal, but that's how those things work. I mean, you're not going to get the consumer of your product really interested in these things unless you really have a solid plan and you're talking to the right folks, and they will reap the benefit of being the first back into this market, because this really is the seminal moment when it comes to showing what's the path forward for critical minerals, but also showing what the real impact is by producing these rare earth magnets.
I think I'd like to take a moment. I know that I want to park something that I want to get back to, which is the Defense Production Act Title III, which really goes back to 1950, was implemented to support the war effort in Korea, really, coming out of the demobilization and the refocus of U.S. industry back to consumer goods and the civilian environment, because it had been totally mobilized to support World War II. So in that interim time, from 45 to 50, they realized the DoD needed to be supported, and they needed to be supported by being able to have authorities in law that allowed them to reach out and continue that logistical supply chain. But we can come back to that in a minute. But I'd like to go back and play a little bit on your role in the magnesium processing that you were trying to bring to the U.S., and kind of juxtapose what you were trying to do and why you were trying to bring the processing back, but also what prevented you from actually being successful because of the actions that China had taken in the industry.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great case study, because it's not, I think it's applicable to just about any critical mineral that we're dealing with as part of our effort to domesticate really the ability to sustain ourselves when it comes to having access to these things. Most of the challenges that we found, I mean, obviously we were developing a new technology. It was not necessarily new in concept. The idea of it had been around, but we were really trying to push it across the finish line, make it to where it was viable for manufacturing and production and setting up facilities here in the U.S. We were 100% focused on bringing that to the United States. And really the challenges that we faced were not on the supply side. I mean, it was really more around consumption. If you're refining 99.9% pure magnesium, who's going to buy it from you and use it and produce parts with it? Me personally, that's where I ran into, I won't say the roadblocks, but it was kind of like the forced constraints in a sense. I mean, most of the production for magnesium parts, of course, it makes sense. It's happening where most of the magnesium is produced, and so that's all in China. At the time, finding buyers that were going to produce parts or be able to locally consume it was really our bigger challenge. The capacity's there, the technology's there. Now it's really building up the demand side of that, and I think that's really where this MP deal, just to go back to this, right? This is where you started on both ends. You started on, okay, we need to produce these rare earth minerals or minerals and metals for this, and we need to have the utilization, the consumption of them, and we did it all in one package. So we're going to process the rare earth, and we're going to produce the magnets. It's a very straightforward, very clear purpose, and that's what they're going to do. So I think going forward, that's a really good lesson for folks. You can't just stay on one side or the other. You can't just say, oh, I'm going to develop the production manufacturing capability that's going to utilize rare earth metals and be disconnected or not have a plan for, okay, but where is that going to come from, right? You got to link those two things together. And I think that's where the administration's going to start doing, play a bigger role. And I think this deal kind of shows that. Again, it's great signal for everybody else.
Yeah, I think that what it really does too is it really brings to light the true power of the Defense Production Act Title III to really not only look at the supply side, but also look at the demand side, because there's not only did they utilize the Defense Production Act, but they also made sure that the policy was in place that looked at the longer term impact, because we have all been involved in those short term DPA, if you will, utilized titles, but then there's no tail to it, or there's no continuity to it. So what this did, and it locked in that 10-year guarantee for the floor price of those magnets and a guaranteed acquisition of those magnets, even if they wind up being just warehoused and stored. But that will allow the longevity of the investment from the private sector to realize that there is something here. But then coupling it with the Apple deal and bringing that in, and then being able to put in some additional money to look at the other aspect, which is the recycling of those magnets, that then now gives a tremendous longevity to the project. So that vertical integration that MP Material has been trying to seek and has been working, right? They built a plant in Fort Worth. They've been going through their pilot phase of making sure they can turn out stuff. But this deal, coupled with the Apple deal and the 10-year floor and guaranteed price, really is what sealed the deal. And it's a unique way that the public is looking at how government can actually get involved on the US side to then really begin to get after critical mineral sustainable supply chains domestically.
This is what a whole of government approach looks like. So now that you've seen the other parts of DoD actually work together to come up with a solution like this MP deal that really does, like you said, it checks every box that any investor is going to look at. This is a truly sustained generational project that's literally establishing a supply chain. Apple came into this deal because MP was seriously in the weeds, talking with multiple functions of the government. This is my opinion, but I'm sure this is how this worked. And they were, they could legitimately go to them and their investors and, I'm sure the other markets that they're talking to and say, this is a real deal. And, the Trump administration, and I'm sure, elements of the Biden administration before that were saying, this is a real deal. We're really behind this.
Right.
So that, that's what I think what gives, folks in this industry the confidence. It definitely gives the financial markets the confidence that everybody's serious. We're actually going to do something. And frankly, we've been calling for this for years, right? I mean, even you and I on a panel last year talked about this is what the government needs to do. Exactly. Not that I'd say they listened to us, but I'd like to think they heard what we were saying. And
maybe somebody was listening.
Agreed, so.
Maybe somebody was listening. But I think that the interesting thing is you said a couple of things there. You said it's a whole of government approach, and and I know back to our uniform days, we were always talking about whole of government approaches to things. I know when I went to the War College, we were talking about that, and we had State Department folks at the table, and they used to look at us and say, yeah, we have to work together to come up with the appropriate solution. But the other thing is too that we have to remove those silos, because when you're executing one of those authorities within DPA3, if you don't have the other folks that are really looking at the total policy that's being applied, but if you don't have that policy arm in there that says, no, we're going to look at all of these authorities, we're going to combine them together, we're going to give some longevity so that there are people that can look out beyond the horizon and make sure that that's there. And that's one of the things that if we look back to China, we know that that's how China works. China looks very, very long term because they know that that's what it takes to be able to do something like that. And so I think that that's applicable in the way that they've done things. I mean, they didn't all of a sudden just take over the critical minerals industry last year. This is something that's been coming since the 80s, really, when they first opened up, started to bring in business.
And what's interesting, I mean, we kind of gifted it to them, right? I mean, we want to be fair.
Sure.
I mean, we gave it away as much as they had a plan to take it. I think they were very opportunistic, and they saw the opportunity that was being presented because they had. I mean, what were we doing? We were looking at, it was all the rave. We were looking at globalizing trade and globalizing industry and all this stuff. So we were encouraging our large manufacturers to go for low cost labor, go for third country processing, all this kind of stuff. And China's looking back going, well, we don't care what we pay our employees. I mean, we treat them the way we treat them. So we have a huge opportunity to suck up a lot of this market. And
Sure.
and they just did what was available to them.
It was a hand in the glove. Yeah, I agree with you. It was a hand in the glove.
it's
They
nice, and I
started their
know-
industry locally, right? They started their industry because that's what they had, plenty of minerals. Well, we got to do something. And then all of a sudden, we started looking across the gate because the doors were open and realized that we could save a lot of money by moving and offshoring the midstream processing, right?
Well, we kept giving it away. I mean, it was really probably a tactical superiority on their side and a strategic error on our side.
The Silverado Policy Accelerator published a report last October that looked at all of the critical minerals that are on the combined lists of DOE, the Department of Energy, and the Department of the Interior, and identified 12 of those. And of those 12, I think it was 10 or 11 are completely foreign dependent on our ability to actually put our hands on the material that we require. So when you look at that and you look at what the One Big Beautiful Bill Act was able to accomplish in funding additional sorts, what do you see over the next 12 to 18 months occurring with utilizing these authorities and these extra funding streams that we've seen, which includes the National Defense Stockpile Trust Fund that was upped by $2 billion when we know that the current stockpile is valued not even at $1 billion, and normally their budget request is about $250 million, and they normally get underneath $100 million on an annual basis.
As we know, that's mostly a transactional entity capability that we have at DoD, and you're right, it's been undervalued in both a strategic sense, I think, and really kind of lacking an updated mandate of what do we even have it for. So it really has become more of a transactional kind of thing. I mean, no disrespect to the folks there. There's some hardworking folks at DLA doing that thing, but at this point, we really have to reassess what do we do with the stockpile? What does it mean? How do we really manage that to the most efficient way and effective for our national defense as we can? I don't think it's outside the realm of prediction to say that we'll see 3 to 4 more of these MP-like deals over the next 12 to 18 months. Part of the reason I say that is because the way congressional appropriations go, you're going to have to spend the money. So at some point, those deals have to be made, right? Because we have put a significant investment toward it, and so the pressure's on for entities like DPA3, XM, all these folks to get money into the hands of productive projects and folks really willing to do this. So I think this will also signal foreign investment into the U.S. So I think this now opens the door to both the creativity, but also the America's open for business in this space. So I think you'll probably see another deal maybe with a Japan or an Australia. Australia's got lots of room and lots of technology, things like that, but you might see that investment directly into the U.S. And I say that mainly because President Trump wants that. So while that may, other people might be able to figure out a deal to do it in those other countries, I think they know his intent, and I think they've gotten that very clear that that's what he wants to see.
Sure.
Because we need to fix what's going on here. At least that's our self-interest at this point. We'll be back to helping everybody else. But right now, building our infrastructure and our capability is really, I think, what's front of mind for him. So I think you'll see, you already see this from Saudi Arabia and some of the Gulf states, bringing some of that investment here. Some of it's in, sexy things like data centers and stuff like that. I say that tongue in cheek, but also, as these kind of deals and the opportunities for them come, we'll see that, and hopefully we'll match that up to workforce development. So we'll start seeing our states getting more involved. I mean, I know the state of Texas was involved in the MP deal.
Absolutely.
They'll be more involved, I think, now that we move forward, because now you're going to have all the local issues that become more prescient for them with the workforce development, sustainment, local issues that are, not really what you think of at first, because you're looking at the big dollars and the kind of the big muscle movements, but really to make these projects work and work well, You really got to have some idea for the fine details at the state level. So I think states are going to really raise their game. States like Florida, Ohio, the ones that you'd expect. But I think you'll see some other states, Tennessee, Kentucky, and some others really start to, elbow their way into the conversation. They've had success in the past in other, in the automotive areas. So none of these states are unfamiliar with how these things work.
Right.
But we're really kind of going back to the 30s, 40s, and 50s in the sense of, what were the real strengths of some of our states, and whether it was manufacturing or raw materials. I think that's kind of, it's a little bit of a renaissance, kind of going back to where we were. And while we don't want to have a world war to go fight and that be the impetus for us to do it, I think it's kind of based on good things. I mean, people like their cell phones, and they like modern technology, and they like asking Siri stuff. So they're becoming more aware of what it takes to do all that.
Absolutely.
and to increase that capability. So I think it'll be exciting for everybody. Hopefully for the next generation of folks too, that they'll really get on board with us.
And I think that's the interesting thing to look at is at the end of the day, we have to stop focusing on the quarterly results cycle and really take a longer view and think of the posterity of the nation in the things that we leave behind, right? We say that, the best time to plant a tree was 30 years ago so you could enjoy their shade. But at this point, the next best time to plant a tree is today, so someone else will be able to enjoy that shade. So I think that's really what we're talking about now, is really kind of reorienting the nation to understand its priorities and focus on those critical aspects that allow our economy to continue to grow into the future, and bringing back some of those capabilities, which we definitely need here in the States to be able to control our destiny and provide for our posterity.
We feel like these things kind of happen in generational kind of cycles, but, we know that, what is it? Don't hold me to the number, but like $1.7 trillion of wealth is going to pass from one generation to the next. And when we see these kind of large movements of capital and things like that, I mean, that's what it's going to get invested in, or these kind of bigger kind of things, because we can go back, 100 years and see where this was happening back then too. So
Right.
I think there's some natural forces, and then there's some, I wouldn't say unnatural, but just some sort of, issues of the now that are both kind of colluding now to give us this opportunity to really, plant a tree and know that it's going to grow for our, great grandchildren and generations to come.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, again, not to wrap up, but before we go, I'm always interested to find out what's on your desktop right now. What's your to-do list? What are the things you're focusing in on? So please, I'm interested to know.
Right today, yeah. So as of talk today, depending on when this podcast comes out, it's somewhat related to critical minerals because it's healthcare technology. It's putting in place the platforms and systems so that in my case specifically veterans, but this will expand to all the population, can have the latest and most efficient access to healthcare, and preventative healthcare and predictive healthcare, and things that help you before you get sick so that you can be healthy. So work on some of that for veterans, and that's just for today. Tomorrow's Friday, so who knows.
Well, Peter, before we go, first of all, I want to acknowledge your great service to the country. It's something that you've started off when you were a young man, and you've continued while you're still a young man, and you've continued to focus in on those that need your support. And I know that you have a very special place in your heart for veterans. I want to acknowledge that and express my appreciation and gratitude for everything that you do for all the veterans out there, as well as for everything else that you do for the nation. So thanks again for your time today. I continue to look forward to working with you as we work together on a couple of initiatives. And I look forward to the next opportunity we have a chance to break bread or have an adult beverage together. So you take care of yourself. The best to your family. Congratulations on your new grandbaby as well.
Thank you so much. And hey, congratulations on the podcast, and looking forward to great things to come.
Thank you very much, Peter.
Take care.
And to everyone who listened or watched this episode, thank you for joining us. Be sure to follow us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts to keep enjoying the Minerals and Metals Initiative.